Canadian dollar has been benefiting against the U.S. dollar on the heels of this news. Adam Button is a chief currency analyst at ForexLive. He joins us here. We're also still joined by Francis Donald. What was your reaction? I mean, we obviously saw the spike in the Canadian dollar on the heels of this news, Adam.
Right, coming into the decision, there was a fundamental misunderstanding of Paul laws. There was so much talk about this dovish hike, but that's just not the way the Bank of Canada operates. They don't guide far out. And if you've been listening to Paul laws, he's been optimistic, and that optimism is reflected in the statement. It doesn't necessarily signal what he will do next, but the market was looking for something that would say, we're going to move to the sidelines. That hasn't happened, and the Canadian dollar has jumped higher.
It jumped higher. Francis, you had said in some of your research heading into this decision that maybe people aren't giving the Bank of Canada enough credit when it comes to raising interest rates, and as a result, some of the weakness we've seen recently in the U.S., in the Canadian dollar against the U.S. dollar is misguided, perhaps. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
we've seen some of that come back. So the market is now pricing in 2 more rate hikes by the end of January into 2019 and 3.5 rate hikes by the end of 2019 as a whole. That seems like it's well priced for now. The risk is that the market actually gets disappointed moving forward and that we see the Canadian dollar weaker on the back of that.
I mean, I know you haven't tweaked your models officially yet, but you were expecting maybe we'd see another rate hike after this one later this year. Do you still feel the same way after everything we've learned this morning?
Absolutely. I still like a rate hike in the fall and then another rate hike in early 2019. After that, I don't have the same conviction. I think the pocket will have closed by then.
All right. So, Adam, on the back of what we're hearing from Francis about where she thinks interest rates are going, and obviously we also have to think about where interest rates are going in the U.S., how does that momentum story play out for the Canadian dollar heading into 2019?
Right. Well, the trouble for the Canadian dollar is anticipating what's going to happen a year out. Now, this is 4 hikes over the past year. There's so much volatility in the Bank of Canada signals. You know, the Fed has hiked the same amount over the past year, but it's been gradual, it's been guided. Whereas Canada, if you look a year out, you really have no idea what the Bank of Canada is going to do. So the Canadian dollar is reluctant to price in too much upside in terms of interest rates. It's kind of a one meeting at a time, 1 month at a time, one Paul Law's press conference at a time. So in terms of that, it restrains the Canadian dollar. However, in the very short term, I think that the chances of a December hike are much higher than they were, and we're going to see the Canadian dollar move up in the next week or so, probably another cent or two from here.
It seems like the Canadian dollar has largely been driven by what's happening to the rates markets, but how much does oil have to do with where the Canadian dollar heads next?
Right, it was an interesting part of the Bank of Canada MPR where they talked about investment in oil offsetting the trade war, which isn't something we've heard a lot about. You know, investment in the oil sands has been sluggish despite, a very high price for oil. So maybe the Bank of Canada is seeing something in terms of oil investment, in terms of action in the oil sands that the rest of the market hasn't yet seen. So that could be a bullish catalyst for the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, interesting comments, Adam. Francis, can you just clarify? I sit here every day, and I hear from a lot of companies that are very cautious when it comes to making big investments right now because of trade uncertainty. But here we are talking about the Bank of Canada feeling pretty good about the business investment outlook. So maybe outside of some energy industry players coming back to the oil patch, where are you seeing noticeable business investment in this country?
Well, we don't get a lot of business investment data in Canada. We see some in imports of machinery and equipment. That's a good way for us to get a sense of how much business investment is happening. The Bank of Canada relies on its Business Outlook survey, which we got at the end of June, and businesses said, no, we still intend to invest, and frankly, we don't have much of a choice. We're running out of capacity to meet demand moving forward, and the Bank of Canada is going to lean heavily on some of this survey data to tell them that investment intentions are still okay, even in the face of trade uncertainty.
Adam Button, one of my takeaways from everything we've heard today from the Bank of Canada is that they feel like, even in the face of all this trade uncertainty, that the U.S. economy is doing pretty well. And if the U.S. economy is doing well, even if there's a tit-for-tat strategy on tariffs, that exports coming from Canada to the U.S. look pretty good. Now, in the world of currencies, it feels like the U.S. dollar has really been the default in the face of all this uncertainty that a lot of investors have continued to gravitate towards the greenback. So do you anticipate that changing in the near term? And if it doesn't change, is that one of the factors that works against the loonie?
Yeah, it's really this question about what is the underlying strength in the U.S. economy. You know, in the day-to-day headlines, we have China trade war, we have Canada trade war, NAFTA talk, a Mexican election, and that adds this volatility and uncertainty. But the underlying strength of the U.S. economy, this path towards higher interest rates, is this soft tailwind that continues to push the U.S. dollar higher. And it's really an unstoppable force at this point because of some trouble brewing in emerging markets, and that just bids up the U.S. dollar in the broad market and makes it tough for the Canadian dollar to really get the upper hand for any length of time.
Adam, always good to get your take. Thanks so much for joining us on this breaking news day. Adam Button, Chief Currency Analyst at ForexLive, with his take on the loonies' reaction to that decision by the Bank of Canada to raise